Time to talk about preparation. And preparation for a media interview is non-negotiable, no question about that. Doing an interview sight unseen can be a disaster. I'll give you some examples. So when you watch other people being interviewed on radio or television, or you don't watch them on radio, you listen to them, of course, but if you watch them on television or you listen to a podcast or you read what they've had to say during a print interview, you will pick up, you'll pick up very quickly whether or not they've had media experience. You'll pick that up very, very quickly. If, for example, you're watching someone on television being interviewed about something that's a little bit dicey, a little bit controversial, you'll notice, not with the fact that they'd cough. That's what I'm doing. You would notice that they might be moving. Their head might be moving. They might be swaying from side to side. They might be using their hands unusually. They might be sweating. They might be saying things in a tone that is a little aggressive or a little assertive rather than being calm. They may be stumbling over their words, of course. But the point I'm making is you'll pick that up. You will pick that up. And when you see that, it will be uncomfortable for you and you will not believe that person. And it doesn't necessarily have to be about anything that is controversial. It might be someone who's developed a new product and because they haven't prepared, they're mumbling and stumbling their way through their interview. Now, what that does, of course, is that takes away the focus from what the story's about. Instead of you thinking, gee, that's a good product, I might buy that, you think, oh, gee, he or she didn't know what they were talking about there, or they stumbled over that. That was a bit embarrassing. So it takes away the focus for what the whole purpose of you getting on television or on a radio show or in a print newspaper or a magazine or on a podcast is all about, and that is to promote your business, to promote your credibility and your authority, to get more people to buy from you, to get more people to trust you, etc., etc. So you don't want to do anything at all. You don't want to do anything at all that is going to distract from that. So you need to do three things. Fundamentally, you need to do three things. There's probably a number of other things that you need to do, but these are the three key things. You need to, and this is prior to doing your interview. So you've had the phone call from the media, the reporter's rung, you're really keen to be interviewed on camera, and they want to interview you. You've set a time. You're going to do it in the afternoon. You need to then do these three things. You need to craft your message. You need to craft your message. And hopefully you have two or three of those messages to craft. Now, what I mean by craft your message is this. Let's say, and let's keep this simple. Let's say, for example, and we did actually speak about this before in one of the earlier modules. Let's say you're a florist and it's Valentine's Day tomorrow, and you've sent a media release out, which is terrific. The media are interested in the story, and the hook that you used in the media release was the fact that you're giving away 10, let's say 20 red roses to the first 20 guys that come in and buy a bunch of flowers for their girlfriend or boyfriend. I mean, we're in the 20th century now, and you will give them a free red rose. And let's say the media have picked up on that and they think it's a nice quirky story. I mean, is it a heavy story? No. Is it a really big news story? No. But it's a nice quirky story on Valentine's Day. And as I mentioned earlier in 6 Steps to Free Media Publicity, when we spoke about this, these are the sort of stories that the media are always doing on the eve of Valentine's Day, or indeed on Valentine's Day. They do them every year. So let's say the media has taken your bait and you are about to be interviewed. The media turn up to your florist shop. And again, as I'm explaining this, please try and equate it to whatever business you're in or whatever you are doing or whatever you are trying to promote. So I know I'm being specific here, but I'm also I want you to think more generally as well with these tips and techniques. So the media turn up, you own the florist shop, the cameraman comes in with a reporter and then says to you, as the owner of the florist shop, we would like to do an interview with you. Okay, that's cool. What you should have done is you should have thought to yourself, okay, what are the three, let's pick three, what are the three key messages that I need to craft here? What are the three key points I want to get across? So point number one, in my view, if this were me, would be something like this. Valentine is a very special day for so many people. And we have decided to celebrate that day by offering a free red rose to the first 20 men that come in and buy a bunch of flowers. Now, that's not convoluted, it's not long, it's not complicated, it's to the point. So let's say that's what you want to say. So there's your first message. That's your first message. Now, let's say you've thought about a second message, and that second message might be something like, make sure that when you give your partner the bunch of flowers and the beautiful red rose, make sure you give them a hug and make sure you tell them you love them. That could be your second message. And so it goes on. If you've thought of a third message, that's fine. That's all cool. So what happens then is when the reporter asks you a question, and we've already discussed bridging, you bridge to your first answer. And when they ask you another question, you bridge to your second answer. Or it may be that the second question that the reporter asks you is worth answering. It might be something like, the question may come from the reporter, it might be something like, how much busier this year is it as a result of COVID? Well, that's a relevant question and it deserves a relevant answer and a detailed answer. That's fine. It may not have been one of your messages, one of your key messages that you crafted, but the point is, it's still worth answering. But then when the next question comes and you want to get to your second point about hugging and loving, then bridge to that. And you've learnt your bridging in the previous chapter. Then bridge to that message. So crafting your message or messages is absolutely crucial prior to your interview, whether it be television, radio, print, or a podcast. It is absolutely non-negotiable. Non-negotiable. The second thing you need to do is anticipate the questions. Now, this is a subtle difference here. So when you're let's use the example of the florist. So when you're sitting down thinking, now what sort of questions is this journalist going to ask me? Well, they know about my deal, so they're probably going to ask me about the free red rose. They might ask me something about COVID. How's business going? They might ask me, I'm just workshopping this, they might ask me something like, how busy are you going to be today? They might ask me, what type of flowers do I expect to sell? Are there any particular flower? So do you get my drift? So you anticipate the questions that you think will be asked and you prepare answers for them. Now, they're different to your messages. You've got your three key messages, but then anticipating the questions that you might be asked above and beyond those messages is that next step. And at least that way, if they ask you a question that's slightly skew if you know what I mean, you'll understand how to answer it and sound and look professional. And the COVID one's probably a good example. If I was a florist and I was going to be interviewed about the deal that I had promoted on my media release, yes, that's wonderful, and I'm sure that the reporter will ask me about that. And I certainly want to get that point across. But I wonder whether they will ask me whether this year's been any different to last year as a result of COVID. And so how would I answer that? Now, I don't want to get into too much detail here, but that answer may not be used in the TV news story that night. It may not be used. But the point is, if you prepare for it and you answer it well, it's all part of the relationship building between you and the reporter. Because when the reporter leaves, they'll go, yeah, they certainly knew what they were talking about. She handled that well. And that's important. That relationship is important. Absolutely. The next thing you need to do, and this doesn't happen very often. It only happens when there's a crisis or when something, may go wrong, or there might be a company that's perhaps got rid of a whole lot of people as a result of cost cutting or whatever it might be. You're going to be asked tricky questions. So you need to anticipate those tricky questions, which is part of anticipating the questions, but especially focus on the tricky ones and understand first and foremost whether you want to answer them. Now, if you want to answer them, then think of an answer. If you don't want to answer them, then you need to think of how you're not going to answer them. Does that make sense? Because the last thing you want to do is be asked a tricky question and say no comment, which you should never do, because what that means is you're guilty. Or, oh, I don't know what you mean, or I don't want to answer that, or that, no, whatever it might be. No. Unprofessional. You need to anticipate those tricky questions, and you need to think of answers. Now, those tricky questions may not come. They may not come. But if they do, you need to be prepared for them. And I'm talking television, radio, print and podcast. Now, as a result of what we've learnt here, these are the two key points I want to leave you with. The first is, when you are preparing for your media interview, you need to practice it. You need to practice it with someone prior to the actual media interview. So you've come up with your 3 key messages, you've anticipated some of the questions, and you've thought of answers there, and you've really thought about the tricky ones, and you understand. Get someone to do a mock interview with you prior to your interview. That way there, you will be as prepared as you possibly can be. That's important. The second thing I want you to do is, now that you're armed with a reasonable amount of knowledge in terms of nailing your media interview, I want you to observe other people being interviewed on television, on radio, in print, on podcasts, and observe from the point of view of, that was good, I like that, I'm going to use that technique, or that wasn't very good, I'm certainly not doing it that way. You will be surprised. You will be surprised at what you will learn. Now that you are actually watching other interviews with this knowledge that you have now. Now, if you're an entrepreneur, for example, and you want to promote your business, listen to a lot of entrepreneurs talking. Listen to the language that they use, their hand movements, their tone, the way they look, the way they dress, the way they answer questions. Observe that. Use the good ones and the good traits, and obviously don't use the ones that are not so good. But I think you'll find that you'll see more now that you have this really good base. It can take just 15 minutes to prepare for your media interview, but that can be the difference. That 15 minutes can be the difference between success and failure.